Welcome back to 100 days of turning my hackathon idea into reality. Today is day 5 and we're going to be fixing some migration issues.
Alright, so last time we left off with a couple of issues. The logo in
Okay,
the website
so
on the GitHub
admittedly,
page
this took me an
wasn't rendering
embarrassingly long
properly.
time to finally figure out.
On my end,
In
it
the
looked
background,
perfectly
you can kind of see
fine,
me just
but for
scrambling
some
back and
reason on
forth, looking
GitHub
between my
it
local
didn't work
version
out.
and the GitHub
The
version
logo
to try
itself
and find some
was
sort of
not
difference between
rendering,
the two
so
files in
somehow the
either the
logo wasn't really
CSS or the
pulling from the
HTML.
right place or
I
something
get the
along
idea
those
to check
lines.
and see if the web
And
page is actually pulling the
the
CSS
logo
correctly,
itself, the
because if it
size of
isn't,
it
then it
was a
makes sense for no
rectangle rather than
stylizing
a
to occur.
square, which
Eventually, I find that the
unfortunately
web
is
page
definitely
logo
not what I
isn't pulling
want,
the CSS that I put in
and
for it at
kind of
all.
makes the website look a lot
For
worse.
now though, I'm still
So
checking
today
through
we're
the
going to go
CSS and
ahead and set out to
HTML,
fix it.
and really not getting a whole lot of work done. Here's where I get the idea that maybe the logo and the logo image CSS lines need to be listed separately, and that because they're being listed together, something is going wrong. So you'll see me changing it right here. I'm not sure why my brain just isn't working, and I'm not typing anything, but I get there eventually. After running git again to push all of my files over to GitHub, I'll go ahead and reload the web page to check and see if the changes made any difference to the logo. All of the work you see on screen right now is all another iteration of what we did last time when we were pushing files onto GitHub for the first time. I'm still using all of the same commands and accessing the right folder for the Git by copy and pasting from my project folder. I'll still be putting in a comment that will let me know afterwards what the change was for, even though I'm planning on making several changes in a row, just for the sake of keeping good habits. If you're curious as to the commands that I'm using in order to push my files onto GitHub, I would suggest looking over at the last video. You'll notice here that I check in on the CSS file in GitHub and it matches exactly what it should be. Then I go over to the website and unfortunately nothing has changed yet. I double check again just to make sure, and then finally get the idea to check whether or not the logo is pulling the CSS conditions from the file in the first place. I notice that nowhere in the inspect function can I actually see that the logo is pulling from the logo properties, despite being able to see it pulling from its parent classes, so I fiddle around just a little bit to see if changing anything will help before moving on. For some reason, I thought that maybe the difference was between having a period to denote a class or not, but that's very obviously not the issue, since CSS requires the use of periods to denote classes that are not automatically recognized as classes already by the program. So at this point, I'm like, I don't really know what is going on, right? I keep skipping between everything over and over to try and see if something just isn't working. I even go around comparing other classes to see if they're getting the CSS properly, and I eventually find that they are. And I think eventually right here, yeah, I get to a point where I'm like, maybe it's because I have these spaces here, right? None of the rest of the CSS has any of spaces. So I go ahead and change that, get rid of the spaces, go ahead and run all of the git commands again to push it over to GitHub, put in a little comment where I'm removing the space after the logo stuff. And we'll eventually see that I eventually push to GitHub, see that the change has been made properly, and then I run it again and nothing happens. So at this point, I'm just super confused, right? I'm like, what is happening? Like, nothing I do is managing to get this to work. For some reason, it just does not work. And I eventually think, what if it's ARIA hidden, right? ARIA hidden can remove decorative content if the program deems it necessary for the sake of assistive devices. And so in my mind, I go, well, what if it's because the ARIA hidden, for some reason, is forcing this logo to not exist, right? And that's in my mind the whole time. But then I go over to Stack and I'm like, well, maybe Stack can help. So I go ahead and ask about CSS not inheriting, but I really can't find anything on this. I think because most of the time people don't really have this problem a whole lot. Inheriting CSS is a pretty simple thing to do, and so it really makes sense that nobody's asking about this a whole lot, right? There's plenty of tutorials out there that tell you how to do this, and it's not that my CSS just purely isn't inheriting, it's kind of a GitHub issue. So I go back and instead I try to just change this ARIA hidden equals to true, so that it would no longer get hidden for assistive devices. And I will be, yep, putting back the git and pushing all of that over to GitHub again. And really quickly, we'll see the change there. We're going to reload. We're going to check. This is a CSS file. I'm in the wrong place. We're going to check the HTML file, and we see that it has been removed. Now, the ARIA hidden uh, getting removed isn't, for some reason, isn't actually reflected on the website. And but the logo did end up as a square again. And so I'm like, okay, that's really weird. I don't quite understand what happened at the time. But looking back, I think it's because GitHub updates its websites or its pages every so often. And so it eventually inherited logo. This is kind of a misconception because it led me to believe that removing the ARIA hidden did something. I don't know. At the time, I was like, I don't know what's happening. But at least the image worked, right? And so eventually I'm like, okay, now the only issue is images. So I go over to Stack and check, and I'm like, Stack says that it's case sensitive. And so I check all of the casing, but it looks like all of the casing is correct, right? My images folder is pulling, or it is capitalized at the beginning, and I make sure that it is capitalized. But eventually I find that you have to remove the forward slash in your image in your image source. And so I go ahead and change that. For some reason I wrote it in as a backslash. That's not correct. That's a forward slash. And so we're going to git push this again. And we're going to go ahead and see that nothing really changed. And at this point I'm like, what is happening? But I do notice that the image source is saying that the forward slash is still there. So I'm like, okay, I need to just have this reload, right? So I go in, I close the window, I open the window back up, check through everything again, and I'm like, this just is not working, right? For whatever reason, it's not updating, and so I check over everything. There is a page build error, but I don't think that's really the issue. I think that's perfectly fine. Pretty sure that was because the logo before was just not pulling, and that was the page error. And so eventually, yeah, so eventually we get to this point, right? Eventually it does reload. I reload the page, and it pops in, and you can see the logo, but it's really, really tiny up in the corner. And so I go ahead and fiddle around with some of the logo image stuff. And eventually I realize, oh shoot, my CSS is different from what it actually should be. And so I go ahead and go back into the code. go ahead and change that, and then we're going to push one last time onto the Git right here, and then it's going to move everything back to GitHub. Let's see. There we go. We're going to git commit. Sorry, no, not git commit. We're going to get push, right? And then it's going to go back up to GitHub. And we're going to the CSS file, and we'll notice that everything has been changed to be correct. So we go ahead and go back to the web page, and we reload. Nothing happens. So I'm like, okay, well, I need to, get this to reload somehow. And I don't want to have to wait, 4 or 5 minutes each time I want to make a change. I need to be able to see that change immediately. And so I go ahead and ask about that. And we look at GitHub pages not updating, but it doesn't really have a whole lot to do with what I'm doing. Eventually, I do find an answer. And I thought it was going to be changing index because that's what I found on GitHub. But I think I tried that and it didn't quite work. Let's see. This one was about UTC time, basically. Like, time upload is different and all of that stuff, but that doesn't really apply to me. I'm in a fine time zone for that. And let's see, we check that everything is good. We edit and commit changes. Then we're just reloading a bunch and nothing's changing still. And eventually, I do find a solution. I think, at what point do I find a solution? I'm not sure. Like looking through the bars, see if there's anything that could help. Right, I open up the website again just to see if it's changed at all. And yeah, so still nothing's working. Let's see, when do I end up figuring it out? Okay, yeah, so here. So eventually I get to the build deployment, and I'm like, okay, just rerun the build deployment, right? If we just rerun the build and deploy it again, then it should reset everything. And so I do that. I go ahead and wait a second just to see if it'll update. Eventually, I go back. I'll go to Actions, see that it's been queued, and then I'll go to Settings, open up my pages, and then check the page, and voila, the image has been rendered properly. So that kind of fixes our issue with the website for now.
So yeah, that was everything for today. This was, I think, in my mind really crucial because I wanted to make sure that no matter what was happening between my local and my web page, that if I were to upload and deploy, then everything would go along pretty smoothly. And if anything isn't going along smoothly, I should know what's happening so that I can fix it, because I don't want this to be something that solely works on my local device, because that doesn't really matter, right? I'm not going to go out showing people like the thing on my laptop. It makes no sense. But it definitely does matter if the website isn't working well. And so I really want to make sure that anything that I'm deploying onto the website is looking exactly like it is in the local version. That way I can make sure that the website looks like how I want it to look and it isn't ending up completely different. That said, that's basically all for today. This was super, super crucial, and I'm really glad that I spent all of this time doing it. And so, yeah, that's basically all of the content. So let's move on to what we're doing for tomorrow. I really, really want to start working on the back end of this. I'm super, super excited for what that back end could look like. And I want to have some kind of AI integration into this just to be able to do what I want to do. But that said, that gives me a lot of drawbacks. For one of the main things is that I myself am largely a Java coder. I code in Java a lot, and I'm super, super comfortable with Java. However, AI models currently don't tend to use Java, right? They tend to use Python because Python is a lot simpler. Python is a lot easier to work with, and especially if you're working with something that's machine learning, having a more mathematical language like Java can make that super, super difficult. So tomorrow I think is going to be full of research as to whether or not I'm going to be able to do this program in Java. I would really, really love to do this in Java because it would make things so, so much easier. And I could also just continue to refine my Java skills. But if it's not possible, that means that it could also be a chance for me to code in Python more and get more experience there. But either way, I think all it's going to come down to is whichever one I'm going to be able to get my hands on. So that's all for today. I'll see you in the next one. If you'd like to keep supporting these videos, feel free to hit the like so that other people can see this video. And if you want to keep getting updates about future videos, feel free to subscribe. All right, that's all for today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.